Nunez-Galvez tomb, or El Panteón de la Familia Nunez-Galvez, was constructed in 1957 in El Cementerio de Cristóbal Colón in Vedado, Cuba. The tomb was a collaboration between Mexican-based Spanish engineer Felix Candela and Cuban architects the brothers Max and Enrique Borges. Candela and the Borges brothers were the main engineer and architects responsible for introducing hyperbolic paraboloid structures, otherwise known as HIPAR structures, and cast shell roofs to Cuba. The Borges brothers were responsible for works such as the interior dining area of the Tropicana nightclub and Club Náutico, where lightweight concrete shells served as open and airy structures in the warm Cuban climate. These structures, with their distinct feature of layered shell components that reveal glimpses to the outside, are worth noting because of the way in which they play with the boundary between inside and outside, making that architectural element a notable component of Cuban thin shell architecture. Candela was responsible for many projects around the world that utilized a hyperbolic paraboloid form in reinforced concrete. Of these projects, Candela developed a foundational structural form for many of his projects that involved taking the double saddle hyperbolic paraboloid form and removing one quad component called the tympan, which he then combined with three others to form an inverted umbrella form. Although these umbrellas were most often built, Felix Candela's masterworks were primarily variations on the double saddle shape to create complex doubly curved structures, and this is reflected in the Nunez-Galvez tomb structure. Collaborative efforts between Candela and one or more of the Borges brothers can be seen in many structures erected during the modernist Cuban architecture movement of the 1950s. These structures include the Antilla Flower Shop, the House of Enrique Borges, and a branch of the National Bank that was built in 1957 and named after the Nunez family. At the time of construction, Carlos Nunez-Galvez was an influential member of the National Bank, which was held by the Batista government after President Brio was overthrown in 1952. Under the Batista government, the National Bank was less regulated, and the Nunez-Galvez family acquired wealth during this time, allowing them to be able to construct such an elegant structure for the family resting place. The cemetery itself is one of the world's greatest historic cemeteries. It is the largest cemetery in the Americas at the size of 57 hectares. Plots in the cemetery were assigned by social class, this practice quickly becoming a means for families to erect elaborate tombs and mausoleums. The Nunez-Galvez tomb stands in structural contrast to the classically inspired mausoleums that were built in the cemetery before the modernist movement in Cuba. Its details paint an interesting story of the Nunez family, Cuban architecture, and the social and political context of Havana in 1957. The tomb is made up of two different structural elements. There is a marble sepulchre located in the back and a hyperbolic paraboloid concrete shell that makes up the entire front of the structure. The minimalism of the structure is symbolic, given its peaked vertical gesture, lending to the elegance of its form. The high part is impressively thin and has two supports that connect directly to the ground via the high part's connection to a rectangular block. The loads flow from the shell to the supports, and the loads bearing on the structure are slid between the three supports comprised of two main supports in the front and the beam system in the back. The edges of the high part are thicker than the average shell depth, and the thicker edges help handle the especially large stresses generated there by the high part form. To make this structure even more representative of the family's wealth, its tinted covering was inlaid with gilded ceramics that flashed golden in the sun, and the sepulchre contained a marble facade that was intended to be filled with the names of thousands of years' worth of family members. However, today it can be seen that only 6 family members are buried in the tomb, and the last one was buried on July 17, 1958, about 6 months before the revolution under Castro. This shows clear evidence that the rise of the revolution came suddenly for the family. It can be presumed that shortly after burying their last family member in the tomb, the family left Cuba. Still, the tomb shell represents one of the purest forms of hyperbolic paraboloid concrete shell in the world. Measurements taken from the tomb show that it can be generated completely by straight line elements, a technique often used by Candela in creating his concrete structures with the use of straight wooden elements. Further analysis of this elegant work of structural art can help shed light on its form and the general presence of high par structures in Cuba.